Welcome to the Colts Squad Show. I'm your host, Derek Schultz. And are we all going to get snowed in on Championship Sunday or what?
And I'm Zach Hicks. And as a DC native, yes, I am definitely going to get snowed in on Championship Sunday.
I'm Alan Pinkett, former Oiler, and don't want to talk about the weather, but looking forward to the games this weekend.
Colts Nation, rise up. It's the Colts Squad. Everything Indianapolis Colts every week. Covering all the big hits and game-changing plays from the Circle City, the way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. It's time to squad up. The Colts Squad Show starts now.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Colts Squad Show. I'm Derek Schultz, longtime Indy sports talker and columnist for the IBJ. I'm joined by a Notre Dame legend and longtime NFL running back Alan Pinkett, and our Locked On Colts everyone's favorite film nerd, Zach Hicks, is here as well. Jake Arthur will rejoin us coming up on a later squad show. Tonight, our series of position group reviews continues with one of the most difficult to watch this past fall. And that was the linebacker group. So we'll talk about those linebackers, at least a few of whom, maybe all of whom, won't be here next year. I mean, we don't know. That is a room that could see an awful lot of turnover as far as 2026 is concerned. But we'll focus on the first segment on looking back on 2025 before we do that. We'll judge the polarizing Zaire Franklin when it comes to the comment section here. And we appreciate all of our comments and everybody watching at home on YouTube. I feel like if you were to type in the algorithm, hey, who was the Colt that was most mentioned on the Squad Show comments this year? I feel like Zaire Franklin's name would be right there with Daniel Jones. People feel strongly about him one way or the other. So we'll try to add some nuance to that, especially kind of get Zach's take on how he feels about how Franklin performed this season, the good, the bad, and just kind of balance that. Possible linebacker additions, like I mentioned, a room that is ripe for some turnover in free agency in the draft, even if it's not a position in a Lou Anarumo defense, assuming that he's still the defensive coordinator, doesn't take a head coaching job somewhere else. Possible changes for that in 2026. And then, as Alan said, looking forward to the NFL's Final Four. It's Championship Sunday, and who Colts fans should be rooting for on Championship Sunday. And I know you're looking at the AFC game, guys, and you're looking at one of the opponents there. I don't think it's as easy as you think, and I'll explain why coming up in the final segment of the show. But, guys, let's start with these linebackers. And look, I even put it in the background, the cutesy little background that we do here. Oof, linebackers. I mean, Zach, at times this year, I felt oof. But then again, at times, especially the second half of the year where I felt like Germaine Pratt really sort of stabilized that second linebacker spot. Zaire Franklin, when he wasn't in coverage, can be an effective player sometimes and can at times wreak some havoc as well. But I think overall we would all agree this was a disappointing group for the Colts last season.
Yeah, for sure. And it was one that could have so easily been avoided because it was something that we were calling for all offseason, right? Like, oh my gosh, get more linebackers in here. They were rolling into training camp with Zaire Franklin and Jalen Carlisle as the top two guys. But then when those guys were banged up in training camp and they just weren't, out there for the spring sessions, and I think Carlisle's missed a lot of the summer stuff. Franklin missed a good chunk of the summer stuff as well. We were looking at guys like Joe Bocci, Cameron McGrone, Austin Ajike. Those guys were getting starting reps all off season. And look, nothing against those guys, but two of those guys got cut in season. That's how their play was. That's how they performed this year. They got their chance to start. It was so bad they got cut in season. Then they cycled through even more names, like Chad Muma was through here as a waiver claim guy. He barely held on a spot. Buddy Johnson was on the roster more as a special teamer, but he got some run on defense. Like, it was just this revolving door of guys who shouldn't have been on the field, because they didn't address this in the offseason. Now, part of that was because Carlisle got hurt, but look, Jalen Carlisle was a safety in college that transitioned to linebacker, and in his first year, missed over half the season due to injury. Relying on him with very little depth behind him to be a consistent starter in year two, it's just ludicrous to me. Like, I did not like that decision. Jake was calling it out all offseason going into the year, and it kind of played out the way we expected. Now, Germaine Pratt, that was, very lucky of the Colts to get Germaine Pratt requesting his release a month into the season, only for him to wind up here. But I'm not going to sit here and say Germaine Pratt was some savior, some perfect linebacker. I think when, in particular, you look at the San Francisco game, there was a giant target on Germaine Pratt that entire game. Kyle Shanahan was licking his lips that entire game, and it was just an absolutely like brutal showing from Germaine Pratt. And it shows that like the good offensive coordinators can put a target on a player like Pratt. And it's difficult to play linebacker in this league, but you know, I'm saying all this to say like Pratt was an upgrade over what the Colts started the season with, but he's not like some long-term like great linebacker that they stumbled across. He was like the bare minimum that you needed to start on defense this year. So that's kind of what the Colts were dealing with all year at linebacker. There were some ups and downs. It wasn't all awful, but by and large, the play at linebacker needed to be a lot better, especially with how injured they were at corner. They really need those linebackers in the middle of the field to pick up the slack. And I just feel like they didn't for the most part. I think their run defense was fine overall, but in pass coverage, it needed to be a lot better. And it just wasn't where it needed to be for this defense to be as good as they could have been this year.
Well, I think the linebacker position has been diminished, similar to the running back position in terms of importance on the defensive side of the ball. On the offensive side of the ball, we talk about the quarterback and the receivers and the left tackle. on defense, we talk about the edge rushers and the corners. And so when you think about it, it's hard to find that guy that can take on a 300-pound offensive lineman, but still, you know, be fleet of foot to cover a big-ass tight end and oftentimes a running back in coverage, you know, and also be expected to beat the offensive lineman to the corner to get a running back on an off-tackle play. It's just hard to find those guys, and in my mind, the defense is always playing catch-up to the offense because you used to have linebackers that were about 250 pounds, and they were designed to stop the run. And then the offenses changed and started throwing the ball a bunch. So now the linebackers got down to like 215, 220. You know, a little more fleet. And then offenses started running the ball again. You know, so it's part of the reason that the linebacker play kind of suffers is because the defense is just they don't have the adequate type of player in there to be able to have all those skills. Having said that, you know, these two linebackers that the Colts have were number 2 and 3. And the team in tackles. Now, I don't know if that says much, but they got their head in there when they needed to have their head in there. I think both Zaire Franklin and Germaine Pratt, you know, showed signs of good linebacker play, but they weren't great. Since this is my first year with the Colts, I'm unaware of some of the things that Zaire Franklin does off the field. So I've only been able to judge on the field.
That's probably better, Alan, to be totally honest, and to not be aware of the podcast and such. Yes.
To be fair, to be fair to Zaire, and we're gonna go into this more in segment 2, but like most players, when you say the stuff he does off the field, it's like some awful thing that these players are doing. Like Zaire Franklin, by all accounts, a great dude. I've talked to him a bunch. You know, he's a very good dude. It's very public figure now, you know, with the podcasting, and that, you know, fans, that just rubs fans the wrong way, and especially when you're not producing on the field.
Yeah, and that's the problem with, you know, any player that is going to have a format where they can voice their opinion. You know, if you're not making plays, then a lot of times you don't have room to talk. You know, yeah, I think the linebackers were adequate. I would just love to see more depth. You know, and you know, and what I mean by depth in obvious passing situations, there's got to be another linebacker that can come in and play in obvious run situations. You know, you see on NFL teams, you know, 4 or 5 guys, you know, coming on the field, you know, depending on down and distance. You know, the 3rd and 8, you know, they're going to bring in one package. 3rd and 1, they're going to bring in a different package. You know, the one constant that remained for the Colts was that Franklin and Germaine Pratt were in all the time. So you weren't going to. They were going to be exposed because offenses, are going to find where their weaknesses are and exploit it. And I think that's what offenses did all year long.
Yeah, and this is not just a Colts-specific issue, by the way.
Mhm.
Offenses in the NFL, it's stemming from the Shanahan tree. This has always been a Shanahan staple, and it's become more of what the league wants to do right now. It's exploit linebackers. Like, get under center, play action out of 12 and 13 personnel, and we're going to go after linebackers. And we saw it in the second half of the year. The Colts played a handful of Shanahan teams or Shanahan disciple teams in going against Seattle, going against San Fran, going against Houston twice. And it's funny because I was just charting the Colts' base defensive snaps earlier today, and it's like under 10% on the year. They don't play much base defense, but when they did early in the season, they were good against the run and the pass. Second half of the year, they're going against these Shanahan teams that like to do play action from under center out of 12 and 13 personnel when you run base. And I think Seattle throws for nearly 9 yards a pass attempt, almost 100 yards against the base defense. Obviously, we don't need to talk about the San Fran game. That was a bloodbath there. Even the 2 Houston games, though, they're averaging like 10 yards of completion on like 5 attempts, but like 10, 15 yards of completion off of play action under center against base. So that tells me that you have a linebacker problem. And every team does. Don't get me wrong. Every team has a linebacker problem unless you're Philadelphia or San Fran when Fred Warner's healthy. But you still need to continually address that. So you need to at least be fast and young at that position. Like if you're going to have mistakes, at least make them at 100 miles per hour, make them while taking the football away. That's a big part of playing linebacker. Like with Zaire Franklin, he was an all-pro a couple seasons ago. And a big part of that was because he forced like 6 fumbles and had 3 interceptions that season. You can have ups and downs in your play. You could have volatility in your play at linebacker if you're taking the football away. That's what I always say about Shaquille Leonard when he was here in Indy. He was not this like overall consistent player from down to down. He was 205 pounds at best, guys. He was not taking on offensive linemen at the second level. But what did he do well? His like 5 years with the Colts, he forced like 20 fumbles and had like 15 picks. Like he was an animal at taking the football away. So at linebacker, you have to be a playmaker if you're not an every down consistent guy, which most guys aren't. In this Colts linebacker room, I mean, Germaine Pratt had that interception late. I think he had like 1 or 2 pass breakups. Franklin maybe had 2 pass breakups on the year, and I think one of them was a batted ball at the line of scrimmage. And I don't think he had any takeaways. I think he had the 1 forced fumble against the Chiefs. So if your linebacker core is getting you 2 turnovers and like a handful of pass breakups, that's not good enough. I can live with the ups and downs in play. I can live with the occasional missed tackles here and there. But if you're not taking the football away while doing that, that's when we have a problem with the linebacker room. And that's what the Colts had a problem with this past year.
Yeah. And like you said, not just the fact that Franklin wasn't playing up to par or Pratt is, a guy that has had his best season sort of behind him, but the fact that you didn't really have anybody to push those guys, I think is a problem. And we've talked about that being a recurring issue. And Alan, I know this is your first year, kind of covering this team, but you kind of alluded to that fact as well. Like what you don't, you made the analogy about, when you buy the house and then you get the front office sees that and they say, wait a minute, this guy's too comfortable in that. And that's when you kind of stick your neck out there and put your neck on the line. We've had a big problem here in Indianapolis. I think just fairly or unfairly, I think it's just human nature for guys like Zaire Franklin to get comfortable because he looks around at the rest of the room and he thinks none of these guys are better than me. None of these guys are going to beat me out. So even if I'm playing at a below par level, not that he's out there dogging it or anything like that. I think he's trying his best and all that. But, Alan, it's an issue, right? When guys get a little bit too comfortable. And I think in a lot of ways that has happened in the linebacker room the last couple of years.
Well, that could possibly be the case, and the way to correct that is just bring in more competition. One of the things, being on a team, you can see when management cares about certain positions more than another, and it's you can tell by the type of talent or competition that they bring in. You can also tell when they're trying to save a few bucks with certain positions, and you're on the field and you're looking at the guy and it's like, this dude ain't that good. Why is he out here? Oh, well, because he's cheap. So the team is saving in money. I'm not accusing the Colts of doing that. I'm just my own personal experience is the team feels it when when management chooses to ignore a position group and just put out an adequate player instead of upgrading the team and having somebody that's going to make plays.
No doubt about that. We come back here on the Colts Squad Show. We will talk more about Zaire Franklin, what he does well, where he struggles, and will he still be a Colt in 2026? We'll discuss next when the Squad Show returns. This portion of the Colts Squad Show brought to you by Robinhood. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you could put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets changes the game. It's people moving the action. So when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but I never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer a spectator. Play-by-play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood. Now available across the U.S., download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. This portion of the Colts Squad Show also brought to you by our friends at Gametime. NFL season in full swing, including the playoffs, and there's nothing like being at the game. Crowd noise, the energy, and cheering alongside other fans. Watching at home, it's great, but being in the stadium just hits different. The frustrating part has always been getting tickets, waiting in queues, dealing with logins, and watching prices change right at checkout. That's why Gametime's app gives you the advantage back to fans. It's the hack for unlocking amazing NFL tickets and experiences in just a few taps. You guys know I love Gametime's zone deals. I've talked about them all year long. All you got to do is pick the section that you want to sit in, and Gametime picks the best deal for you, allowing you to save even more. That price has the fees included up front as well, so the price you see is exactly the price you pay. No surprises. Take the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today and get back to being there live. And we're back on the Locked On Colts Squad Show. Alan Pinkett, former Oiler and Notre Dame all-time rushing leader. Zach Hicks of the Locked On Colts podcast. And I'm Derek Schultz. Hi. Thanks so much for joining us. Jake Arthur is on assignment. His assignment is being a really great dad to his newborn son, Ben, who has made his debut several times on this show, and he will rejoin us for a future squad show, but appreciate having you along here for our Thursday edition of the Colts Squad Show. Guys, let's have the Zaire Franklin conversation. I think people understand, we talked about it, Zach. We talked about it all year long. Look, he's not a good coverage linebacker. In fairness to Franklin, no one's a good coverage linebacker for the most part, right? Now, he's one of the worst in the league, or at least was this past season. One of the bottom tier players had one of the Pro Football Focus, if you want to go ahead and look at that as something tangible, worst coverage grades at that linebacker position. But, here was a guy that was a second-team All-Pro in 2024 and had, for the most part, a good season, even with some of those warts sort of mixed in. And he was clearly not to that level here in this season. High volume tackler. I know that matters less in 2026 than it did in 1976, but a reliable player too. I think I want to throw that in there. He's missed one game in his last 5 years. And that's, for a team that deals with injuries a lot, I think there is value in that. The fact that, your best skill is your availability. I think that's what Zaire Franklin does bring to the table. And he's also one of the voices of this defense in the locker room. But then again, Zach, I'm not always sure that's a good thing. So, it's almost like every good you have with Franklin, and there are goods, seem to have almost like this little caveat attached as well. Like it's good, but ... And that's sort of how I feel about him overall.
Yeah, I mean, just to give the brief background on his time with the Colts for Allen and for anyone who's not super in tune with it. I mean, he was a 7th-round pick back in 2018, an excellent find by Chris Ballard, a guy who worked his way up from special teams to playing on defense. And come, 2021, 2022, he's starting to get legit starting time with this Colts team. And because they had him waiting in the wings, because they had EJ Speed waiting in the wings, they let a really good linebacker and Bobby Okereke walk. And Franklin was named a team captain. He was the guy who took over for Shaquille Leonard. He was racking up stats, racking up all these great numbers. And after 2021, looked like, a very good player for this Colts defense. Then 2022 happens. The Colts are one of the worst teams in football. And right before that season, he starts a podcast with EJ Speed. And they're talking a lot of smack on that podcast about just certain aspects. And there were some bad clips that aged horribly, like one saying that he wanted to play against a team like the Giants to where his stats could rack up on a national scale because they're a bad football team. And then that Giants team late in that exact same season just eviscerated the Colts or whatever. Or I think that was actually 2023 or something like that. I don't know, but it happened for sure. And just things like that aged poorly for him. And because the podcast, because of his social presence and all that, fan opinion of him has wavered in the past year, even though he was named a second team All-Pro in 2024, like Derek said. So what is the overall take on Zaire Franklin? I still think he's a fine player. I don't subscribe to Pro Football Focus's overall ranking on him. I think that they are really weird with their linebacker grades. I don't think he's as bad a coverage guy as Pro Football Focus has graded in the last couple years. But I do think there are issues in coverage, and we've seen these last few years, especially this past year, I think was his worst year in coverage, because I don't think he has this overall feel for routes behind him or just routes in general. And that's such an aspect of playing linebacker right now. We all watch Aiden Fisher with Indiana this year, and on that national championship game, I was watching the Skycast of Aiden Fisher in that game actually, and you could see the whole field, and you could see the way that he was diagnosing routes behind him. There was this one, I know I'm going off on a tangent, this is more for the third segment, but they threw a bubble screen to his side, and they were faking the bubble screen to throw a little hitch behind him, and he closed on the bubble screen and then backed up and broke up a pass on the hitch behind him. That's what I'm talking about with a coverage linebacker, is that ability to say, hey, I saw this on film. I know that when they are in this concept here, in this formation, that they're going to try to fake this and come back behind me. So I got to know where to get to behind me. With Franklin, a lot of his play is see ball, get ball. And that's fine. That's a perfectly fine linebacker. I think he robots well too out of play action. But the thing with him is when he's been playing Mike these last couple of years, especially this past year in Lou Anarumo's system, you can't be a see ball, get ball type of player. When you're that green dot guy, you have to be a guy who can feel what's behind him. You have to be a guy who can understand the route concepts coming your way. And too often there's like a hitch that's right next to him or right in front of him, and he's just not reacting, and he's not closing space. He's not getting the depth he needs, and it leads to the middle of the field being open. And that was also the issue with Germaine Pratt being here too, right? Two linebackers that have the same exact issue being your two starting linebackers. Like neither guy is going to be good in that situation. So that's where the Colts are really vulnerable over the middle of the field. But with Franklin, I think he can be a guy who can be like an outside linebacker, can be a guy who, when you go to under fronts, he can go to the end of the line of scrimmage. And again, you just take the tether off him and let him attack. I think he can be a playmaker for you. I think we've seen him be a guy who can disrupt and create tackles for a loss and create forced fumbles in the past. But overall, if he's not getting those turnovers, if he's having a missed tackle rate, he was at 15% missed tackle rate this year at linebacker. You just can't have that. So if he's missing tackles and not taking the football away with those coverage issues he has, what do you have at linebacker? You just have a below average guy who's not giving you those big plus plays. So for him, I think he's a fine linebacker, but he's got to be able to take the football away, and he's got to be more consistent with his tackling, because that the coverage is probably always going to be an issue for him. So I think this was his worst year in the NFL this past year, the worst year since he got his second contract this past year. But it was his first year in a completely different system. So the book is not closed on him, but fan opinion's very closed on him at this point because of what's gone on the last couple of years. So it's a very difficult situation. And like Alan and I always talk about, the NFL is so much about it's like a money pinching league in a lot of ways. And the Colts can save around $6 million with cutting him. I mean, look, if Lou says he's not a great fit, and we just saw on film this past year, it wasn't the greatest fit, and you could save $6 million and allocate that to a different linebacker or to the defensive line, that's certainly on the table for the Colts. So yeah, overall, I don't think he's a horrible player. I don't think he's what Pro Football Focus had him as the 88th out of 90 linebackers this year. I don't think he's that bad. He's a starting caliber linebacker in this league. He just didn't have the best year in a new system that he has. In his entire career, he's never played in a system like this. And his warts really showed up. The missed tackles just went a little over the top, and he wasn't forcing the takeaways. So the Colts have a decision to make this offseason, and I wouldn't be shocked if they don't bring back Zaire Franklin.
Well, I'll say this for watching him for the first time. I really appreciate how he hunts the football, how he comes downhill and attacks with reckless abandon. That's what I want out of a linebacker. But, that's just like saying you're a running back. All you can do is run the ball and you can't block. Well, you can't be in the game if you can't do both, and if it's the first year in the system, then I think the Colts probably need to take a hard look at who would be better to fit their system, as far as him being boisterous on his podcast. I mean, you don't want to talk about it unless you can back it up. I mean, that's always been a rule amongst guys is, don't give them bulletin board material, and you definitely don't want to be criticizing folks unless you can back it up. If you can back it up, then hey, say what the hell you want. But some of the best players, if you follow the example of some of the best players, I don't hear Patrick Mahomes, dogging anybody, saying somebody is bad. I don't hear Josh Allen dogging anybody. Then again, you don't want a choir boy out there either.
I would say defensive players are a different animal.
Yes,
though.
they
All
are.
the corners got podcasts and all those things. Defense is a little bit of a different animal. But like you said, Alan, if you're going to talk, I'm all for people talking. I love it. I love trash talk. But like, you also have to take the heat when it comes back at you when you don't perform well. And the last couple of years hasn't been great for him or for this Colts defense. I think this past year was the best overall the Colts defense has been in 3 or 4 seasons, but it still wasn't great. So it's hard to kind of talk your talk, when the production's not really there for you or your defense as a team captain.
Well, the one thing you said that gives me a little bit hope was he was playing in a totally different system. So, hopefully next year it won't be a new system, and he can correct some of those things that were going wrong. But in contemporary professional football, they expect so much out of the linebacker, and it's just hard to deliver all those things you need to be a great linebacker. And you mentioned, if you say linebacker now, you think of Fred Warner. I can't name another linebacker who I would say checks all the boxes. They do a couple things well, but they can't necessarily do everything well. And I don't know if it's possible to do everything well with the way offense is being run now.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I just think overall, like I'm okay with keeping Zaire Franklin. It's a difficult aspect of this. And maybe you can give some insight here, Alan, too, is like, I'm fine with him having a green dot, for instance, but I don't think he should be the Mike linebacker. But his pay is basically saying he needs to be the Mike linebacker with how much he's making, right? But I always thought his best fit would be as the outside guy or the Will or the Sam or however it is in the system with a different guy with the green dot. But again, your pay kind of indicates your responsibility in the NFL. So, and like taking the green dot away from him would be kind of a tricky situation, So I don't know how the Colts would navigate that. Do you have any insight on like Alan, when it comes to like the pay indicating that kind of stuff,
Well, I mean, a lot more is expected of you when they pay you more, but your leash is longer in terms of being let go, right? Because they're paying you more because management made that decision to pay you. So management is not going to be quick to take the blame. They're going to let you. You need to make a ton of mistakes for them to let you go. But again, I will say, since it was the first year in the system, then that is probably his excuse. But he's probably, I wouldn't say excuse, but he's the green dot because he's the most tenured linebacker on the squad. So that's one of those things that sort of gives you confidence, because he looks around the room, it's like ain't nobody in this room better than me.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? The other thing too is that, he's got a general manager. And again, like we've talked about this all year long, who is fiercely loyal to his players. So, I feel like every single year we have a conversation like this where like, oh, the Colts have an out on so-and-so, or hey, this guy's a cut candidate. And then the offseason goes by and nothing ever happens. And they're back in the locker room and you see them in Westfield and you're like, oh, okay. Like they're back. Like, cause I agree with you, Zach. Like, I think Franklin, I'm rather indifferent as to whether he stays or goes, but part of me is sort of like, you look at the rest of that room and Pratt is a free agent too. And if you cut Franklin, they've got nothing else. We're talking about remaking the room right now. You need a full scale, not a house renovation. You need to build a new house if you have no Franklin and you have no Pratt. And I don't know if Ballard, if this really is an urgency year, is going to be willing to do that at that position.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's tough because when you don't have in-house options, right? You can't just cut guys and bank on landing the free agents or bank on landing, because then you pigeonhole yourself in the draft, So I don't really know how to approach it, and honestly, I don't think Pratt should be brought back. I think you need to get younger and faster on that defense, and Pratt at pushing 30 and, probably doesn't fit the mindset you want to go. But if you also cut Franklin on top of that, at least going into free agency, then you might leave yourself in a very vulnerable spot. So maybe keep Franklin on for a little bit in free agency until you see what you land. And then cut. I don't know. I don't know the solution, but I am with you, Derek. It's an interesting conversation. I'm torn on if I would cut him or not, but I think he can be fine. It's just you got to have solutions in place. And most guys who hit free agency are hitting free agency for a reason.
This segues nicely into our next segment. Who are some of the linebacker possibilities, either in free agency or the draft, that may fit this Colts team? We'll talk about it next when the Colts Squad Show returns. This portion of the Colts Squad Show brought to you by our friends at TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress and without the guesswork. Things are especially complicated for me. I have a LLC for my freelance business and media stuff and writing and talking and all of that. And I'm you guys can probably already tell us, I'm not a very good guy when it comes to like math. I'm not a very smart guy. So instead of spending hours trying to figure out all these forms and whatever else, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online, and they handle everything. W-2s, self-employed forms, all of it. And they work to get you every single deduction. That's another thing, peace of mind for getting all those deductions. It's a huge time and stress saver. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just, get this, $150 all in. If a Turbo expert does not file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate, get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. That's TurboTax.com/local. And we're back on the Locked On Colts Squad Show alongside Alan Pinkett, Zach Hicks. I'm Derek Schultz. Thanks so much for joining us. My dad will like that, Reed. I know he started watching and listening to the show. He's a retired CPA. So that's one person that actually likes doing taxes. He's like the one person that there is. But call our friends at TurboTax and take care of that for you. That's what I'm calling. I'm not calling my dad for that. Let's start with the draft here, Zach. And obviously, whether you feel comfortable with this title or not, I think you are viewed as one of the, if not the Colts draft authority when it comes to this. And I know we have some months coming up before the draft, right? So I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know you dabble here and you watch prospects kind of sprinkle in all year long before you kind of really, really go after it here in the coming weeks and, Senior Bowl and all this other stuff that we're talking about that is on the horizon here. But any linebackers that jump out to you? And am I right in saying, from what I've seen, and this is very surface level, this appears to be certainly a really talented class at the top. Arvell Reese, basically both of the guys from Ohio State, right? Sonny Styles, but a deep class as well.
Yeah, it appears to be a really good linebacker class on the surface. Styles might go in the top 10, and he's a true off-ball guy. Like Arvell Reese, there's some chatter of him being an edge or an off-ball guy, but Styles is going to be a true off-ball guy, and he might go in the top 10, like legitimately. But there's a handful of like really good linebackers who can go in the top 50 range. Jake even gave a shout out on his prospect highlight today on the regular show. It was Jake Golday from Cincinnati, apparently a guy that Jake's really high on. Josiah Trotter from Missouri, a couple other really good linebackers in this class. So like, I'm not opposed to drafting a linebacker at 47 or in round 3 even. Like, I think this is a good linebacker class. Get a young, fast, high pick linebacker. Ballard has not missed on his top 50 linebacker picks. It's only been 2, but he's, Okereke and Shaq Leonard have been very good selections for the Colts. My thing is just don't leave it to the draft. Make sure you get some other guys in here that can potentially play a little bit in free agency. But yeah, it seems to be a really good linebacker class. Jacob Rodriguez, too, from Texas Tech, just swept all the awards, was just won every single award, like Bednarik, like best college player and all that stuff. Like, he racked up the stats. Anthony Hill Jr. from Texas might not be there at 47, but a good player. So yeah, there's a ton of linebackers in this class that make a lot of sense for the Colts. And obviously I got to shout out an Indiana guy because of the podcast here, but Aiden Fisher, like I mentioned in the last segment, I just think he's the perfect guy to put there next to a Zaire Franklin type, or put next to, just have as your Mike linebacker, just the ability to read the field and have eyes on things. And Alan, as Alan said in the first segment, with the NFL transitioning back into this, we're running the ball more. Now we're running at these lighter linebackers. Maybe there's not this as big pressing need to have all your linebackers be like track stars. A player like Aiden Fisher, who maybe isn't this like super juiced up, like super speed linebacker, but he knows where he needs to be, can work in the modern NFL where teams are trying to put 12 and 13 personnel on the field. They're trying to just hit those windows behind linebackers. And a player like Fisher, who can just identify what's going on and where he needs to get with his depth, is the type of player that can work nowadays, more so than what could have worked in the RPO days of like 5, 6, 7 years ago, when all your linebackers need to run 4.3 or they were going to get cooked. Now you can probably survive with a guy running a 4.6 or a 4.7. So Aiden Fisher is a guy who I think he goes anywhere from late day 2 to early day 3 out of Indiana. I think he's a really good player who could fit what the Colts need.
Well, I would defer to you, Zach, in terms of what kids in the draft could come up and be viable linebackers. But all the names you mentioned sound like dudes that can play and can make plays. But I would be, there's growth that has to occur, coming from college to the NFL, and the game is so much faster. So I would almost prefer a veteran at the linebacker position. But here's the problem: if you're getting one cheap, he's free for a reason.
Right.
Right. But if you want supreme talent, you're going to have to open up the checkbook, and then you got to take into consideration, are they familiar with the system that Anarumo has? So those factors sort of all lead back to we're going to see number 44 again.
Yeah.
But to me, I think those guys are solid players. Zaire Franklin, Germaine Pratt. I would just like to see more depth. If there was more depth there, and there were times you could spell them, maybe Zaire Franklin played first and second down, bring somebody in on third down, and then over the course of a game, give him a few third downs, and you'll probably see him make those plays where he's separating the ball from the player.
Yeah, no, I think for me, the plan of attack is like, if you're going to draft a guy at 47 or in the third round, even like top 100 pick at linebacker, make it a luxury pick. Don't make it a pick where it's like we need, like, look, I love that they got Tyler Warren. I was terrified going into the draft though, where it was tight end or bust for the Colts, right? It was, if we don't take a tight end, Mo Alley-Cox is going to be our number 1 tight end, which I love Mo, but he's not number 1 tight end in this league. I don't want the Colts to come into the draft with that. It can't be we let Germaine Pratt walk and we don't sign anybody to play linebacker whatsoever. And it's Franklin, Carlisle, and Wohler getting healthy somehow, and that's it. But if you can go and get like Nakobe Dean from the Eagles, who is like that third linebacker there, probably hits the open market, has an injury history, so maybe he won't be extremely expensive, but a 25, 26-year-old guy who has been pretty good. Caden Ellis, who Ben is mentioning in the comments here, another guy, a versatile player who checks some boxes. Christian Harris from Houston, like just players who you can take a chance on there. that could work in your system. So that way you're just not going into the draft with, okay, we got Franklin, we got the whatever Carlisle has played 8 games in his NFL career. Wohler is still in a walking boot as of right now, but that's our linebacker room. So now we have to take a linebacker or else. I don't want that situation. But if you go get a Nakobe Dean or whoever, right? Just whatever it is. It doesn't even have to be Nakobe Dean. It could just be a handful of different linebackers to plug in there and at least say like, hey, we know this guy can play on Sundays. And then when you take a linebacker at 47 or at 70, whatever it is, then you can have that competition. You can have multiple guys capable of playing on Sundays. And heck, if you get something out of Wohler and Carlisle, then you have a 5-man room instead of a 3-man room. But at least have a 3-man room. We can't just have 1 or 2 guys in this locker room. So I think that's just the thing for me, is just keep devoting resources to a problem. We saw with corner throughout the year, the Colts kept throwing resources at it, trying to get to work. Like, I at least appreciate throwing the resources at a problem. You have these resources for a reason. Get some more guys in here.
Well,
Zach, you mentioned. Go ahead, Alan.
I was going to say the conundrum is, in the draft, and you see it all the time, and so many teams just overthink it, but do you take the best player or do you take your most desperate need? Right. And there's got to be a balance between those two. They may need a linebacker, but somehow this badass defensive end slips down to pick 47. What do you do? So I've always been a fan of, you take the best player available, right, and that will make up for the need.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's why I say, like, make sure that when you're looking at your roster going into the draft, there's nothing that you say, like, we need to get this position in the top 50. Like, you can never go into a draft saying, no matter what, in the top 50, we have to take this. Because who knows, like, say you're saying that, like, we were saying that about Tyler Warren in this past draft, right? What if Warren went at pick 14? Then what are we doing? Then we're taking Mason Taylor that high, or are we trading up in round 2 for Mason Taylor? We taking Oronde Gadsden in round 2? Like, those are good. They ended up being good players, but you know what I mean? Like, you can't pigeonhole yourself in the draft. I'm with you, Alan. It's this dance that you have to do as a GM where it's, sure, you don't neglect need whatsoever, but you take the best available player at a position that makes sense for you. Like, if you have a quarterback, you're not taking the best quarterback, obviously, but you take, the best player at a position that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I just want to go into the draft where it's like, look, we have guys at linebacker who can play, but we really like this linebacker. Let's turn the card in, more so than being we have nobody at linebacker. I guess this guy's the top guy at linebacker. Although we're neglecting this really good defensive tackle on the board, we need to get this linebacker. And I think that's where Balor's gotten into trouble in the past.
You mentioned Nakobe Dean, Zach. Any other potential free agents in this class that strike you as possibilities? I know I'm not sure on fit, but the Chiefs, given their salary cap situation, and Leo Chanel, he's coming off a shoulder injury, right? And we know Ballard loves injured guys. I'm just tossing some other names. Anybody else that kind of comes to mind that has piqued your interest that is going to be likely to be on the market in a couple of weeks here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple guys, like the Caden Ellis is one, just the versatility. Chanel's funny, though, because he is a pure Sam linebacker. Like, he is an old school Sam linebacker, defend the run, get him off the field on passing downs. You do not want him out there on passing downs. But like Alan says, if you want to go this linebacker by committee approach and just rotate your linebackers, like, get Chanel in here for whatever it costs and have him play some of your underlooks and just crush tight ends and fit the run. That could certainly work for you. But yeah, Nakobe Dean's a guy who I like taking a chance on. I don't know what his price tag is going to be because there are the injuries. He did slip in the draft, but he had some pretty good play this year. Christian Harris is a guy I mentioned from Houston, where he's 25 years old, fell out of that rotation down in Houston, but a former Alabama linebacker who's still, again, 25 and pretty athletic. I'm willing to take a shot on a guy like that. And then there's always these, I mean, look, when it comes to free agency, these guys are typically in that 28 to 32 range, coming off their first or second contracts. And they can just be guys who know what they're doing, that just don't cost a ton of money. And they're not going to give you amazing play, but they can at least give you stable play, like a Germaine Pratt did for the Colts this year. There's a handful of guys like that. But if the Colts want to swing big, the two big ones are going to be Devin Lloyd and Quay Walker. We'll see if they actually touch the market. Devin Lloyd, I really don't think is going to, but I'm really hoping he does, at least to get out of our division, because he was a menace this year for the Jaguars. Quay Walker, up and down play with the Packers the last couple years. You would have to pay the guy a good chunk of change to try to get him to another level, which is always risky. But I think Walker or Devin Lloyd could make sense for the Colts, but they're going to cost a pretty penny to get them here.
Who should the Colts and the Colts fans be rooting for on Championship Sunday? We'll take a look at the NFL's Final Four as we wrap up this edition of the Colts Squad Show next. This portion of the Colts Squad Show brought to you by Indeed. If you've ever hired somebody who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed-sponsored jobs. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed-sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page, and it helps you reach the right candidates faster. Need to hire somebody at your company? Go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what you need. Real experience, not just a resume buzzword, right? Don't struggle to find candidates or get your posting seen. Use Indeed to expedite the process for you, make it more stress-free. Spend more time interviewing candidates who actually check all of your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed-sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Back for a final time on the Locked On Colts Squad Show. Really appreciate you joining us alongside former NFLer, Notre Dame legend Alan Pinkett, Zach Hicks. You guys know he's your first listen every day, along with Jake Arthur on the Locked On Colts Daily Show. I'm Derek Schultz. Our squad shows Tuesday and Thursday. Live stream at 9 o'clock, but whether you're watching us right now live, and we've got a healthy chat room going on right now, or you're catching up with us later, we really appreciate you tuning us in twice a week. Let's talk about Championship Sunday because, look, and Alan, I know that you're kind of new to the dynamic, and I'm starting to realize that outside of Indianapolis, people don't really know how much Colts fans despise New England. I think nationally it was viewed as a Tom Brady, Peyton Manning thing. So once Brady and Manning sort of moved on, people thought that everybody else moved on. And largely, I think Patriots fans moved on after that. Colts fans did not. Colts fans, the Patriots are still public enemy number one. But I teased earlier in the show that I don't think it's as easy as you think. There's this thing now about Denver that sort of makes me uncomfortable, Zach. And it's they have really planted their flag in Peyton Manning, which is fine, right? He had a great second chapter of his career there when people thought that he was done here and the Colts made the decision to kind of move on. He wins MVP. He walks off into the sunset with a Super Bowl, even though obviously he was a very diminished player in that 2015 season. But, when Denver's playing in big games, and that hasn't happened a lot in the post-Manning era, and, he's up there in the box and they put him on TV or they got him on the video board and I see that bright neon orange, I don't like it. I don't, not like I dislike the Patriots, right? Like I understand that hatred is much more deeply rooted here in Indianapolis, but I don't know if I'm going to be throwing a parade over Denver going to the Super Bowl either. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I think it's funny that Jake missed this one because me and Alan are probably the worst two people to ask because we probably don't have any animosity in our hearts for these two teams. Like, for me, like, again, since covering this team in 2018, I really became a fan of the team since covering in 2018. So my fandom is from 2018 to today. So for me, last weekend was all about make sure the Texans don't advance. Anybody but the Texans. The Texans are the team I dislike. They're always beating the Colts. They're annoying, and the way that they rebuilt that team annoys me. So once the Texans got eliminated, everything else is gravy for me. I have no issues with the rest of the way, but I understand the Colts fan perspective because my best friend growing up was a Colts fan. So I got to see him seething about the Patriots all the time. I get to see him seething even about the Broncos as well with the Peyton Manning stuff. So I can kind of see it from the periphery a little bit, but I personally, it's like, yes, I am rooting for the Seahawks or I'm rooting for It's funny, actually, the Seahawks, even throwing the Seahawks in here, wasn't there a big Andrew Luck, Russell Wilson, like, fan debate thing there?
That was more Seattle fans
Yeah.
getting mouthy about that, right? I don't think people in Indy care, but you're right. That was a thing. I mean, God, that was, 12, 13 years ago now, which is crazy to think. But yeah.
Right. And then we always have to hate the Rams too for what they did to our boy Scott Tolzien. Or was he the Scott Tolzien one? I think that was the Rams.
Season opener 2017.
So yeah, we have reason to hate all the teams. I say we root for ties the rest of the way, guys, and just so no one gets to enjoy it by themselves. But yeah, no, it's I think for me, it's funny because I never grew up hating the Patriots, but I kind of got to see everyone else hate the Patriots. And so I didn't get to feel the full weight of like Jonathan Taylor in 2021 with that long touchdown run against the Patriots and how all Colts fans were like euphoric in their excitement about that. But I did get to see it from everybody else, and it made me get excited for them. So I guess, there is a little part of me that's like, I don't want the Patriots to win, but I understand what you're saying, Derek, when it comes to the Broncos, that like that recent Peyton Manning debate stuff does irk a lot of Colts fans.
Well, lots of thoughts on this one, and I'll start with the Peyton Manning. I'm not mad at him at all if he's sitting up in the box cheering on Denver because, Peyton is the reason Lucas Oil Stadium was built. And
100%.
And how do they reward him? They say, "Oh, the year you're supposed to make $30 billion, you can't pass a physical. Your neck is bad." So what does he do? He puts it in their face and he goes to Denver and wins the Super Bowl. So I'm not mad at all at him for doing that. I sort of look at it and I say, who would you prefer on the AFC to be in the Super Bowl? Wouldn't you prefer Denver to be in there because you beat Denver this year? All
fair. I didn't think about that. You're right. Yeah.
Albeit it was a questionable call that gave us another chance. It gave the Colts
correct call. They called it. Means it's correct. It's correct. We did it, baby.
Maybe you should think of it that way. I think that most of the time in the championship game, the better quarterback's going to win. But I'm contradicting myself because I thought Josh Allen was the better quarterback, but you can't turn the ball over in the playoffs either. And so New England, I'm a bit envious of the New England fans because, for the last 20 years, all they've seen is a team lose. They had one bad season and they jump right back in the saddle when Vrabel becomes the head coach. So I think they're a good story. I don't think Drake May should be the MVP. I think Drake May is good. He's got a long way to go. But I think he's getting some Brady vibes from being up there in New England and those guys winning. On the NFC side, I kind of like the Rams. I think Matt Stafford is a great story. He's ageless and continues to make plays. And there's not a defense you can throw at him that he hasn't seen before, that he doesn't know the answer of. And I think that the NFL would probably prefer the Rams to be there because there are some bona fide stars, some guys that people know, like a Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. And I don't mind that the running back for the Rams is former Notre Dame.
Yeah, he's fun too. Kyron's fun. Even if you're not a Notre Dame fan, I mean, he's a fun player to watch for sure.
The NFL wants their 2 MVP candidates in the Super Bowl. I will say that. Now, again, I'm not all about the rigging of the NFL. I don't believe in that whatsoever. But I do think if the NFL had their perfect Super Bowl, it would be Rams and Patriots for sure out of these 2 teams. Absolutely. Now, for me as a film nerd, I want the Seahawks going for it. They are such a fun football team on the way that they coach that defense, the way that defense plays, the way that Nick Emenwari is like the perfect defensive player in every way. I love him so much. They are just a fun football team. I really want to see them win. And especially too with Sam Darnold, he got so much flack last year for how he played against the Rams in that playoff game. It led to him leaving the Minnesota Vikings because he got the yips in that playoff game, took all those sacks. Had that second game against the Rams where he kind of overcame those demons. I want to see him do it in the playoffs now, overcome those demons against the Rams, who have that playoff pedigree. They won a Super Bowl before. I want to see the new team get in there. I know they're not the new team because they won a Super Bowl like a decade ago or so, but so it's not that new of a team. But Mike Macdonald, I think, has been the best coach in football this year. I think he has been just phenomenal with what he's done with that defense. They just mix and rotate so many different guys. They've had multiple defensive backs just come out of nowhere to be just stars back there. And they're just, it's such a good team. I really love watching the Seahawks. So I want to see them on the big stage in the Super Bowl, and right behind, seeing Stafford and May versus each other in the Super Bowl would be fun. But I want to see the young MVP candidate quarterback in May versus this just stout Seattle defense, which I think was just as good as Houston's defense all year and just didn't get the credit, for it, because Houston had the two flashy pass rushers. But Seattle, they're just so well coached, have so many good players in that defense, and they are a pain to go against for just about anybody. But I will say, if anybody can beat them, it will be McVay and Stafford, because, those are Hall of Famers right there as well. So the NFC game is going to be really fun. I hope the AFC game's fun, but I don't know if it's going to be
with the injury.
The injury at quarterback, and May's fumbled 8 times in these playoffs already. I need him to hold on to the football already. I don't want to see look, I love defensive football, but I don't want to see inept offensive football in the AFC. I don't want to see a 10-9 game and a team limping into the Super Bowl. Let's get through this and get a fun momentum swing from both teams going to the Super Bowl.
Well, part of the reasoning that I gave for Colts fans wanting the Broncos to be in the Super Bowl is the same reasoning I'm going to apply to the Seahawks being in the Super Bowl, because the Seahawks have shown to be a dominant team, but the Colts took them to overtime with a 44-year-old quarterback.
Well, almost overtime. They lost on the last second.
Oh, yeah. I was close. Yeah. The story was better when I said overtime.
They lost in the last.
They led in the final minute. Yeah, they led in the final minute. You could say that because they did.
But here's the thing: against the Seahawks, led with a minute left in that game, with under a minute left. Against the Rams, led with under 4 minutes left in that game.
Yeah.
And then against the Broncos, won on the last second kick. So of 3 of the 4 teams, the Colts were right there with all of them. The Colts are so close, everybody. Buy it back. We're running it back. The urgency has never been higher.
That is the point. They're close. They're close. 8-9 should have been, 12 and whatever adds up to 17.
This message was paid for by Carly Ursay Gordon.
There we go.
But Derek, what are your thoughts on this week? What are your thoughts overall?
I find the Rams the most non-threatening as far as I have no problem with the Rams. The only issue that I have is that we just kind of saw it 5 years ago. So that story, the Stafford McVay story, I understand, Puka and the names verse and some of the other additions that they've made, but we kind of did that story, and I'm looking for the fresh story. Yep. I think Seattle would be a fresh one. And like you said, they're a great team as well. I think it'd be great for Mike Macdonald to actually, maybe walk out on the street and actually get recognized if you won a Super Bowl. You know what I mean? He's operated in anonymity, right? So pretty much for this year, for as great of a job that he's done. And then in the AFC game, as much as I have this weird distaste, I think the Broncos have the worst uniforms in the NFL. Maybe that's part of it too. I've never been a Sean Payton fan. I have a buddy back home in Connecticut who posted a picture of his kindergartner after they won last week, and he said he's never seen the Patriots in an AFC championship game. And I thought, no, I can't allow this person to make this to have sports joy and make this joke. Even though I love him like a brother, I can't. Everybody has that friend, right? There's just something weird about guys. I want all the success in the world for my friends. I don't want to see any of their sports teams win. I don't want to. You know what I mean? Yes,
I totally feel that.
While I'm down.
Nah, Derek, one of my best friends got into football about 5-6 years ago, really hard, and he picked up the local team, Washington, and of course they had that year last year, and he got to enjoy that year last year with Washington. I'm like, no, you have to suffer like I did for 20 years, Or my other friend is a Patriots fan, and we were talking about it the other night, and he was like, look, man, there's some first graders out there who haven't seen the Patriots in the Super Bowl. And I'm like, oh, the first graders. Think of the first graders.
Get out of my life. Yeah. 100%.
I want the team that has had to suffer the longest. And I guess technically that's the Seahawks out of these teams.
Weirdly, right? Yeah, it's kind of weird to say that, but yeah.
And also, but like of the quarterbacks who've had to suffer the longest, right? Of all the quarterbacks here, it's Sam Darnold for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
May hasn't had to suffer long enough.
No.
Stafford hasn't had to suffer at all recently because he got his. Stidham, you're a backup. I don't care about you. But I think when it comes to Sam Darnold, like what he's had to go through, going through the Jets tenure, getting picked up by Carolina, getting that resurgence with the Vikings, and now getting picked up again with the Seahawks and leading them to a 14-3 season. I'm with you, Derek, where like the narrative wise, maybe this is because I work more on the media side now with sports, and I become more of like searching for the narrative. But like, I think the Seahawks narrative is just too good, and I certainly want to see the Seahawks win this Super Bowl. I don't mind any of these teams winning it, but the Seahawks, like Sam, just don't turn the football over the next 2 weeks or the next 2 games, and I think they have a good chance. Just don't turn the football team over.
And it is nice. It's nice to just kind of sit back and like I really couldn't. I don't care. You know, Patriots, Broncos. I'm leaning Broncos, I guess, a little bit, but I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. And in the NFC game, I would be thrilled to see either of those teams. I like watching the Rams. I like watching the Seahawks. And that's the best kind of championship Sunday, I think, to have, when you can just kind of root to be entertained more than root and have a much of a rooting interest.
Like last year be with the two villains last year with the Eagles and the Chiefs.
Yeah. And to have some fresh-ish blood in there. I understand that these are pretty good franchises here that we're talking about, right? And even though there's been some dry spells, notably for the Broncos, I think these are it is a fresh storyline for sure. So this Thursday cadence will continue on the Locked On Colts Squad Show. That means we'll be back with you on Tuesday night at 9:00. We'll know the Super Bowl matchup by then. We'll continue our position reviews, but as always, keep it locked on Jake and Zach the rest of this week and early next week on Locked On Colts, your first listen every day. And be sure to follow at Locked On Colts on socials and check out our other great content on YouTube and TikTok. And we'll see you next time right here on the Squad Show.